a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown.
I'm Mark.
And this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball. We're now past the 2021 Hall of Fame induction ceremony, and we have our, I suppose, 4 inductees, though, you know, for our purposes, we're really going to only talk about 3 of them.
Yeah, Marvin Miller never played a game on a baseball field, but he got in the Hall of Fame, deservedly so.
I mean, very important to players' rights, had a great mustache, and his name is Marvin Miller, and that's about all I can tell you. But no, we're going to talk about the other 3 guys, and it's kind of interesting because I feel like this class in a lot of ways is very emblematic of the Hall of Fame and how they go about inducting people into it, because you have one guy that everybody knew was going to be going in. There was no doubt, and that was Derek Jeter. No question.
Right. Even we Met fans, and even we Met fans who would like to say, well, Jeter, was a really good player, obviously a great baseball player, clutch player, and I can't speak to that probably even.
But was
enough.
he really the best shortstop at any
Right. That's what Met
time?
fans will tell you. Going, he wasn't even the best fielding shortstop in New York, at the time, and you would probably rate Reyes slightly
and Ordonez.
Ordonez was very early in that,
but he was still playing. Those were the 2 contemporary Met shortstops to Jeter, and you would say both of them were better fielders than Jeter.
But it's also Met fans acknowledge Jeter's greatness in the biggest moments. Right, the guy was
3,000 career hits,
6th all time.
Yeah,
6th all time in hits. Okay, so that's a no doubter. When you're 6th all time in hits,
you play as many seasons as he does, has as many big. And the thing for Jeter is like a lot of guys in the Hall of Fame, he has a bunch of big indelible moments that are uniquely Jeter.
He's one of our 6 great plays that are hall-worthy.
And we didn't even talk about one of them where he dove into the stands and came back with a bloody nose, bleeding because he dove for the ball in Fenway. Like, those are moments that you remember that become part of the tapestry of baseball. And, like, he's going to be in. There was never a question about it.
So he had something like, I think, 3,465 hits or 3,400 hits, just crazy amount of hits. And so as we had an episode on 200 hit seasons becoming an endangered species, to get 3,000 hits, let's just keep in mind that you'd have to have 150 hits for 20 years. You'd have to have, or if you had 200 hits, you got to do 15 seasons of 200 hits. There isn't even going to be anybody who gets 200 hits this season.
Right, exactly. It's not easy to do. So what that also speaks to you is your ability to play a whole lot of seasons and be healthy.
Oh, great point.
Something that you could really say, because I can only remember maybe 1 or 2 seasons where Jeter really dealt with big injury issues.
The guy was out there. He played every day and played well every day and finished with the storybook, base hit to end his career. I mean, just everything about that guy had sunshine on his shoulder. Right,
exactly. If you wanted the face of baseball, he was the face of baseball for a long time.
And just because Jeter loves to torture Met fans, it's just something that he does. He has to become the guy running the Marlins.
And he's doing a good job now.
He's doing a good job, and they're a real pain in the neck to the Mets. And
like Jazz Chisholm and Sandy Alcantara are going to be really annoying to play against for the next 15 seasons.
So it's just not enough that we had to have him be across town the whole time and winning championships.
Now he's in a division, but now it's a lot easier to hate him.
Right. You can dislike him even if you respect him.
Yeah.
There's total respect there. So the first guy, and so one of the things that struck me about, and I had I had it on in the background, the Hall of Fame ceremony this week on Wednesday, which is weird that it was on a Wednesday and not on a weekend. Lots and lots of Yankee fans. Oh, my goodness.
That's the thing, is that you kind of feel bad for the other people, because no matter what, you're being inducted in the same year as Jeter. It's going to be all about him.
Well, and, let's face it, COVID, travel, Cooperstown is 3-4 hours from New York.
Easy.
Much easier. You can drive there. You don't have to fly in and do stuff. So it kind of made sense that would happen. But, the standing ovation they gave Rivera because he was in there. So 31 Hall of Famers showed up to be there at the Hall of Fame to watch. And I checked and said there's 72 living Hall of Famers. I'm just curious as to how many of the people.
So almost half of them.
Right, almost half of them. And you had Frank Thomas, right? You had Pat Gillick, the GM of the Blue Jays and the other teams, Mike Mussina, Sherholtz of the Braves, the GM, Eckersley and Smoltz. God, we got to get these guys on our podcast together. I just want to talk to them about doing both of those things that they did so well, winning, and that was a trivia question this week, the most wins and saves combined for the two guys, Jack Morris, who's had a bit of a rough summer. Bud Selig was there. Lee Smith, Trevor Hoffman, Raleigh Fingers, Goose Gossage, and Rivera, who got the standing ovation. So those are relief pitchers. A real Ferguson Jenkins, who looked terrific, and it's got to be in his late 70s. Burt Blyleven, Trammell. These are names even you have heard of.
Yeah, these are all the Hall of Famers.
Right. Ripken, Winfield, Molitor, Larkin, Carew, Edgar Martinez, Sandberg, Pedro Martinez, Wade Boggs, Henderson, Orlando Cepeda in a wheelchair. That was kind of hard to watch. Joe Torre and Ken Griffey Jr., who still looks like he ate the other Ken Griffey Jr., if you ask me. He's a big man now. He didn't look that way when he played baseball.
Not the kid anymore.
And so the other thing I noticed was, you had a catcher, Ted Simmons, right? He was the first guy to come up. And we've talked about Ted Simmons on this podcast. And I think that we probably said that he was an almost guy who shouldn't be in. And I think we dinged Andruw Jones, although I'd say we both favored Andruw Jones getting into the Hall of Fame ahead of Ted Simmons.
Because Andruw Jones just did everything Ted Simmons did, but more.
And so what Simmons did, though, when you really look between the numbers and deepers, he had those 7 seasons that Jay Jaffe talks about of excellence, where he had the best. And this is when Bench is playing and Carter's playing.
He was competing against the all-time greats
and he hit 300 for a bunch of seasons, so he had some really lousy seasons to pull his career average down. And he had this weird thing. So he's playing for the Cardinals, and a guy named Pete Vukovich was a Cardinals pitcher into the early 80s. In 1981, he gets traded to the Milwaukee Brewers. Okay, and sure enough, in 1982, who's playing in the World Series? The Milwaukee Brewers and the St. Louis Cardinals. And so he pitches, he catches against, and Pete Vukovich pitches against the Cardinals, and it's a really good series, but the Cardinals win. And he kind of felt like he kind of missed his opportunity because he never did, Ted Simmons, win a World Series. He played for a bunch of teams. But just, a really good offensive catcher, not a great defensive catcher.
Right, which is where it hurts him when you compare him to a guy like Andruw Jones, who had a similar career average, but hit more home runs and was one of the greatest defensive center fielders of all time.
Right.
So it wasn't like he was playing a low-value defensive position, compared to catcher. He's playing one that's equally as important.
And we let offensive catchers first go into the Hall of Fame. Mike Piazza's there, and he's the poster child for a guy who was a good. I think you'd say about Piazza, he was a good receiver of the ball. Well, yeah, you're the catcher. You're supposed to catch the baseball.
If you can't do that aspect of your job, what job are you doing?
But on this podcast, what's her name? Jane, whatever, she's the head of the Hall of Fame. I can't remember her last name. She talked about the fact that, there's 333 people in the Hall of Fame, and we know there's about 260, 70 players, and there's other, officials in the game. So she said there's 1% of all the players that ever played baseball, because there's now just over 20,000.
Now, granted, you're talking about like 1 point something percent. It's going to be low, like 1.1, 1.2, but it's still 1%.
So Gordon and I on this podcast, since we've started it, just say there's room for more players in the Hall of Fame. And Ted Simmons, is the point I'm going to make here, is sort of emblematic of what that means.
The guys we should be quibbling over are guys that right now we would say there's no way they should be in the Hall of Fame.
Right. He's not a Hall of Famer.
Because realistically, when you look at like the guys that aren't in, that should be in, I mean, you could add 40 people potentially to the Hall of Fame and not even push it above 1.5%.
That's the point. It's still 1%. You could add 40 people and you'd still be under 1.5%. And so what's the big deal about having this? It's still an exclusive club.
Right. But now you're going to be arguing because it's like guys like Larry Walker and Ted Simmons shouldn't need a political campaign and fan pressure in order to get them into the Hall of Fame.
I think Simmons had more advocacy for his campaign because he got in by the Veterans Committee, not as an ex-player the way Walker did.
But the writers were pressured to put in Walker because there has been a huge push from current fans saying, why is this guy not in the Hall of Fame?
Right. I mean, and so why wouldn't Larry Walker be in the Hall of Fame? Like, what was the big knock? You know what it is.
He wasn't great on defense.
No, he's a great defensive player.
Then what was his...
Played in Colorado.
Colorado didn't make the guy hit 300.
I'm so tired of the Colorado bias, right? And this is going to come up when Todd Helton.
Because Todd Helton should be in the Hall of Fame.
Absolutely. This is the guy who should not be even questioned.
Because not only was he one of the greatest offensive first basemen of that era, and then you could say really the only guy he wasn't better than during, the heyday of his career is also a first ballot lock Hall of Famer in Albert Pujols. So it's like, I can't really punish a guy because he wasn't as good as Pujols.
And you want to, okay, so here's a Rocky who had a nice Rocky career, who's definitely not a Hall of Famer, benefited from Colorado, Vinny Castilla.
Yeah.
Really
Andres Galarraga.
nice, really good player, won batting titles and stuff,
But
not a Hall of Famer. Right.
Helton, Hall of Famer.
Right.
Larry Walker, Hall of Famer.
So adding to that, and so I think Simmons and as you point out, Walker are sort of like, yeah, that's what we're saying about having more people. They could have put another 10 guys in this year.
Right. And then a guy like Omar Vizquel. Should a guy that won that many gold gloves, won a decade's worth of gold gloves, not be in the Hall of Fame?
And he's been accused on this very podcast of being a compiler, which is true to some degree. He played a lot of years.
The difficulty when you're talking about the Hall of Fame is that you have to talk about players in the current context of the Hall of Fame. And a guy like Omar Vizquel doesn't get in because you can consider him a compiler. But in a just world where you're putting the correct number of players in the Hall of Fame, a guy like Omar Vizquel isn't a compiler anymore.
Right. And so I think we always felt he was marginal. I think I didn't have him on my list.
I'm a little more bullish on him than you are.
But overall, if you go up to 10,000 feet, he should be there because there's another 20 or 30 guys. And we're going to do this. We're going to probably say, we've talked about the first 9 guys that aren't in that should be in. I think we can go to 30 and exhaust the reasonable candidates.
We might not even get to 30, in all honesty, because there might be a point where we're like, are we really going to say this guy should be a Hall of Famer?
And then we still have a Hall of Fame with less than 1.5% of the players all time that are in it. It's still an exclusive club for the greatest of the great.
We just get rid of the guy because, and if we're going to be really fair, honestly, we shouldn't count the steroid guys as part of those 30. Because it's dumb to me that we're going to be like, oh, yeah, Barry Bonds shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame.
Well, we both feel the same way about that. They earned it. And I think you mentioned off air, Dale Murphy is a perfect, an emblem of a guy who should be in the Hall of Fame.
Why are we quibbling over whether...
Guy won back-to-back MVPs. You know what? If you win back-to-back MVPs, you're in the Hall of Fame.
It's the guys like Robin Ventura. No. That should be the guy we're quibbling over. Like, is Ventura good enough to be in the Hall of Fame? No.
Really good fielder, had some big seasons.
Hall of very good.
Yep.
That's the player that should be on the borderline.
So we'll do that in a future episode. I noticed as they all sat down, so Ted Simmons is the first guy, and he, of course, somebody wrote about that he had like a Hogwarts professorial way of talking. They loved this guy, and he was apparently nicknamed. And I watched this guy play almost his entire career because I was aware of what was going on. Mm-hmm. And he had long hair, I guess, during his playing days. And when I thought about it, I guess everybody had long hair, in the 70s, and so that he was nicknamed Simba. Right. So I'm going back and forth with some of these people, on Twitter. And like, was he ever called Simba during? Oh yeah, he was called Simba in his career because he had like a lion's mane. I'm like, that sounds like a name they gave to him. It's not true. It actually was his name, but he never was referred to that by any broadcaster.
Right? No, because it feels weird because it's like, well, the Lion King didn't come out till like
right.
1990. So wasn't like so
why did they call him Simba?
Where did they get the name Simba from?
The same thing. So I was looking in of all the players that showed up, and I'm thinking, man, the catchers must really hate Ted Simmons because not one catcher showed up. No Pudge, right? No Fisk.
No Piazza.
No Piazza.
No
now,
Bench.
Johnny Bench was going to introduce him, and he got COVID before this, so he didn't show. So, really, I mean, we love Johnny Bench. And he's
which, in a way, might have been why the other guys didn't show up, because you don't really want to try and be Bench's replacement.
But, catchers don't get in very much. It just surprised me. Now, it's a COVID year. You don't know what everybody's situation is. But, to not have any other catchers in the audience.
He's not one of us.
Yeah.
He doesn't belong.
He wasn't. No, it wasn't that. Come on. You're not serious. So, I also
Bench
noticed
out there infecting himself with COVID. We won't give him the satisfaction.
So, and we talked about the standing ovation. So Rivera got one, Jeter got one, and Joe Torre got one. Lots of Yankee fans. Lots of Yankees. No, Reggie Jackson, who was there, did not get it.
Probably too old for a lot of Yankee
And Winfield
fans.
did not get it. Now, I don't know if you identify Winfield as a Yankee primarily or not.
That makes sense, though, because think about it. Rivera, Torre, and Jeter
all
were all
won.
contemporaries. So if people are there to watch Jeter get in, they're going to be people that were fans of Jeter's team. So they're not going to feel connected to Reggie Jackson and Dave Winfield in the same way.
It just felt to me a little bit, particularly in Winfield's standpoint. So you've got Mr. October, that's Reggie, and they refer to Derek Jeter as Mr. November. You know what Steinbrenner referred to Dave Winfield back when he was playing for the Yankees? Mr. May.
Ooh.
That was cold-blooded, man.
That was Steinbrenner, though.
That's Mr. May.
That's Steinbrenner.
So, and Winfield is an all-time great player.
And you know what? Part of me appreciates the Steinbrenner-esque energy that Cohen brings back to baseball. It's nice. Like I personally, as a fan, I like that
Me
he
too.
tweets out things after the game.
Me too.
Like it makes the problem is that baseball fans can be too sanctimonious when it comes to this stuff, and it's the same.
No, you can't be serious.
The same way with the Hall of Fame, like this is going to cause internal disruptions in the clubhouse. Like, I'm sorry, these are grown men who are paid to play baseball. If the owner tweeting on Twitter is putting them in a tizzy, causing them to be unable to play, we've got a way bigger issue.
And so Jeter gets up there and he teases out the writer that didn't vote for him. He goes, I want to thank you. I want to thank one for voting me into the Hall of Fame or something like that. And everybody kind of laughed, going, "Yeah, you're tweaking the writer who didn't vote for me. He would have been unanimous like Rivera."
I wonder. You almost wonder if that was like that's the point. One of them was like Jeter shouldn't be the unanimous guy. Do like the writers have to pick straws out of a hat to be like who got the duty of not voting Jeter?
And in the audience on that afternoon, Michael Jordan is sitting there, and behind him is Patrick Ewing. And watching Jeter, I assume, get inducted into the Hall of Fame, it was a little odd. Not that there was anything wrong with it.
But I do remember there being the weird thing that wasn't it Jeter, Brady, and Jordan that all like were friends.
Boy, I don't remember that.
For some reason, I think that's the case. Like they're all friendly.
Yeah, and kudos to Jordan, I guess, because it just reminded everybody about what he couldn't do, which was be a great Major League Baseball player. Barry Larkin looked fantastic, and one of the things that I thought was interesting is when the Reds almost drafted Jeter when he came up, but they had Larkin at shortstop. So if the Reds drafted Jeter and they had Larkin at short, Larkin would have been the shortstop. Where would Derek Jeter have played on that team?
Yeah, how much longer? Because Larkin played until like 2000, 2001.
Yep,
he didn't retire until after.
So they were contemporaries.
But that means like Jeter got to start playing in '96. So if he had gone to the Reds, he would have either sat behind Larkin for like a bunch of seasons, or we'd have Derek Jeter, the second baseman.
We would have had and we wouldn't have the history, and we wouldn't probably have a Hall of Famer. Would he have risen out of that, or would he have gotten traded?
Who knows? Who knows if Derek Jeter playing second for the for those Reds teams? Now you've got Larkin, Jeter, Sean Casey, like those. There were some decent early 2000s.
Made a
Red
big difference
teams.
to have a guy like Jeter playing second base.
Right, you might have been because it wasn't like they had Brandon Phillips at the time. He didn't come till much later.
Later than that, yeah.
He didn't come till the end of that decade. So I mean, you put Jeter at second base there, the Reds might be a different team. The Yankees might be a different team.
And they talked about the 10 Hall of Famers that were lost over the past 2 years. You remember they did not have an induction ceremony, so they kind of have put the 2 years together. Hank Aaron, Whitey Ford, Tom Seaver, Lou Brock, Al Kaline, Bob Gibson. These unbelievable to say these names. These were my
Titans.
heroes. Morgan, Phil Niekro, Don Sutton, Tommy Lasorda. Tommy Lasorda, SMS. So these are venerated names, and that's the point of the Hall of Fame. Why we think there can be more people in there. They should be.
It's never good. I mean, yes, it's over 2 years, but it's not a good look when between the 2 years you've got less people going in than people dying.
Well, and there are years in the Hall of Fame voting, right, where nobody gets in.
It's hard for me to believe that like you should get to a point where you're like, yeah, nobody should go in.
Right, we should have so many good candidates in the Hall of Fame. All the marginal guys are in our book, and now it's like, you know what? There really isn't anybody.
We need some guys to retire.
Yeah, and now we've talked about this on the podcast. We've got some guys like Miggy, and these are is Joey Votto a Hall of Famer?
I mean, I think if you're looking at right now, you've got probably if you look across it, like 4 to 5 locks right now
in our book,
certainly. You've got Pujols.
Yep.
You've got
Miggy.
You probably have Verlander.
I agree.
I think it's hard to say that he wouldn't be.
I would put him in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
I would. Greinke?
Greinke and Scherzer are guys that you're going to have to talk about. I would probably Greinke is a guy that you would have to strongly consider. I think then you would have guys like Votto that you're going to have to strongly consider.
Particularly on the basis of this season really helped him a lot.
Like he's still,
same thing with Wainwright. I wouldn't have even put him in the conversation, but in our Hall of Fame,
he probably is a guy in the conversation.
You talk about him.
There's another no doubter in his catcher.
Yeah.
Yadier is in their first ballot no doubter.
Yep. Buster Posey,
guy that you're probably talking about strongly, especially with how good he's playing.
Okay, how about Madison Bumgarner?
No.
Right, I agree. So you can't.
He only had a couple seasons of true dominance, and then he faded.
Yeah, well, he had an exceptional World Series and then a really good World Series.
Right.
And so that
helps.
At least, but what I want to do is get into the conversation about guys like that and go, yeah, there's just no way that Bumgarner is in there with all those other guys. He might be, another poster child of an almost guy.
Yeah.
He's not.
And that's where we need to get to with the Hall of Fame. It was what we've been saying.
Yes.
Really, realistically, we went through the list of guys that should definitely be in the Hall of Fame, and it's not that long.
Right. And so
there's some guys playing that might get there. I think a guy like there's a bunch of guys in the NL East that I think if they play out their careers, like you've got Soto and Acuna, even a guy like Freddie Freeman.
Long way for those guys to go.
But all of those guys are putting together the types of careers that could get them towards the Hall of Fame.
And in the coming years, you're going to have guys like Jimmy Rollins. He's going to come up. You're going to
Halladay.
Chipper Jones made it. Halladay's in already.
Halladay's in. Yeah.
So you're going to have guys that you think, they had really, really good careers. You know what? Actually, they were better than really good. Those are Hall of Fame careers.
CC.
I think it's somebody you can talk about.
CC's name is going to come up in a couple years.
It doesn't feel like to me
he should be, but he should be because
in the conversation,
right? Because he should be a guy that's on the border instead of a guy that has no chance. That's the issue with the Hall of Fame,
right? I think 5 or 10 years ago, a guy like CC you'd never even bring up as a possible Hall of Famer. And I think the way we value players now, he has so
because here's what I'll say: Mike Mussina is in the Hall of Fame,
right?
I would take CC over Mike Mussina any day of the week if I needed to get a game.
I don't think you saw Mussina pitch enough at his best.
But even at his best, I would still want CC over him.
And so all these numbers, we talk about Simmons' 248 average and Andruw Jones, hitting around 250. That's so far away from 300, which was always the benchmark. Everybody has to recalibrate a little bit on the numbers, and we've been doing that, right? Is anybody going to be a 3,000 strikeout pitcher ever again?
Probably not.
Probably not. You got to strike out 250 guys for 12 years.
Guys don't pitch it, but they don't pitch enough innings or to enough batters to do that. So what you're going to now need to look at is things like K per 9 rates.
And your whip.
Because that's going to tell you, okay, how effective was this guy when he was
We have better
pitching?
metrics, so we're going to have to use them because 300 game winners? No more. None of those. 200 is going to be the new 300 when it comes to pitchers. And the guy won 200 games. And that's going to be the benchmark.
A meaningful thing.
This is a benchmark. The home runs, well, maybe that's going to change. It's going to go higher because guys hit so many home runs.
Yeah, because now guys hitting 300, 400 home runs, you just have to play enough seasons and be a good power hitter.
Right, and you can do that and nothing else.
Pete will hit 300, 400 home runs in his career easy.
Yeah, Pete Alonso, I think you're right. He's already on there. He's already got over 100.
He's already got over 100.
So I think we'll put an episode together where we're going to throw in the guys, and we don't know how many guys that would be the cutoff where both of us go, can't.
But that's going to be the interesting part about it.
Is it 15? Is it 20?
I don't
is it
think
more?
I don't know. We'll break it down. We'll first figure out what we need to, the number of players we can add to keep it under 1.5%, and then work back from there.
Yeah,
because if we go to 2, we'll definitely run out.
But in closing, the Hall of Fame, the ceremony was. I watched, or peripherally, I watched the whole thing, and I listened to the speeches, and I liked it. It was maybe because it didn't have it last year, but it's nice to hear these guys thank the people in their careers that helped them on the way up in terms of the coaches and the people in their lives. I really liked that.
Baseball is a game with history, and Major League Baseball needs to lean into it more because unlike a lot of the other sports, you have video, you have stories, you have game logs of all of these guys and their accomplishments. You can get to know these players as a fan even today. And the fact that you have all of that and you just have, this long running history of baseball, you need to find ways to lean into that to show people the interesting aspects of baseball history and get them to be fans of the game and not just fans of that season.
And what other of the major sports do you have generational careers where a guy will play 20 or more years, right? Football players don't play 20 years.
How many? You have a lot
Basketball
of
players don't play 20 years.
And you have so many guys that played 20 years and then went on to be a manager.
Right. So they're part of the game in a way, but I think the playing time it's very different
these guys
from
that
the other
covered
sports.
people's entire
Right.
formative years. Guys that started playing in 1989 and they were playing until 2007 when I graduated high school.
Yeah.
That happened.
Yeah. There and so there's a few guys we talked about that have played in 4 different decades. You know, guys like Tim McCarver who played in 59 and 1980, so he just barely touched that. That doesn't happen in any other sport. So I think that's you said lean into the history, lean into the tradition, and lean into the stories.
And I think it's like one of the things that you compliment the Mets broadcast does really well is because they know baseball history so well, they're able to talk about the whole context of that game. They can talk about, 50 years ago, the Mets played the Braves this weekend, and this is what happened and who was in the game. That's cool.
Yeah, and I don't know that other sports have that quite as much, right? You don't hallmark games. You know, I remember that game. You know,
It does. It's something unique.
It does happen. It does not as much as baseball.
It's unique in terms of how much you can do it in baseball.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it special. Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform.
And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Cool.
The good.